All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and we've been going over basically some examples of the miles per gallon program using as a basis or a baseline our textbook, JavaScript 6th edition by Sasha Vodnik and Don Gosselin. So far, I've gone through several examples to go through the material that's in chapters 1 through 4 in our book. In this particular set of examples, and there'll be two of them, I'm going to go over and combine working with the document object model, DOM, and HTML with enhancing and validating forms. All right. When I get done with this one, I'm not going to go over anything from Chapter 7. Remember, I'm also not going to go over anything from chapters 9, 10, or 11. All right. But when I get done with this chapter, what will be left, we'll be looking at some examples of manipulating data in strings and arrays, and then going back and adding some jQuery. All right. Now, I do want to mention as we start here, to begin with, that now I have added a form to my routine. So, in fact, if I run this, you can see what it looks like now. I just, again, arbitrarily picked a color. You may or may not like it. But I'm going to use JavaScript in this. But before we do, and let me close a bunch of this stuff because I don't need it anymore. All right. Let's take a look at what we've done. So I have put in some HTML5 document or validation. So notice I've said that miles is a number field, which means we don't have to worry about putting in non-numeric values that won't hold them. Also, the minimum value is 1, the maximum value is 1,000. You can still circumvent that. In other words, when the program is running, I can still put in here, now notice I can put in, I could go all the way to 1,000, that would take a while. I could put in 1,000 here, but I can't go up. I can put in a 1 here, but I can't go down. But I can still manually come in and type in -44. All right? And the same kind of thing in gallons used. The minimum is 1. I can't go down using this. The maximum is 50. I can't go up using this, but I still could come in here and manually do something like this. All right? So this program is using a combination of HTML5 error handling techniques, all right, and JavaScript. I'm also making the field required. All right, gallons used is very similar. The only difference is instead of the max being 1,000 as we had in miles, we now have the max of 50. All right. Now, notice too for our miles per gallon, I made this disabled. And what that means is it's going to come out and actually appear on screen to be a little grayish in color. But if I put in values here and I click calculate, I can't change this. Okay? And I'd want that. That's very similar to if I had come in here and used a calculator and I'd said 7 times 66 equals this. You know what? I don't like that. I don't like it to be equal to 460. I can't change it. That is what it is. And in the same way, if I put in 300 for miles driven, if I put in 10 for gallons used and I click calculate, 30 is my answer. All right. I've also got a reset button in here, and you'll see that in just a minute. So I've got a calculate button, and I've got a reset button. Okay? This also, if you remember from earlier chapters, I'm going to grab something. I'll grab it back from Chapter 3. Chapter 4, remember, were our errors. But for this, that's all we had in our CSS. We were making our background color aqua. We were using a font family, making our button a certain size, and whatever. Now, since we're using a form, that pretty much necessitates us adding some more stuff to our CSS. This still is not a big file. It's 40 or 45 lines long. Here's where I set that color. If you don't like that color, we could have just come in here and said, for example, pound, I don't know, 0000FF, which should now make this green when we run our program. Refresh. Oh, red, green, blue. Oh, it's blue. Sorry. Okay. I guess just to be right, if I wanted that green, it should have been 00FF00. All right. Now, you may or may not like that, but you get the idea. Okay? All right. So, I put in some margin. This centers it on the screen. We said the width of our box, basically, the whole width will be 500 pixels. We put a black border around it since we've got green. If we wanted to, we could make that border gold, as an example. And you can see how it changes. All right. We put padding on there. The H1 heading, I said, should be aligned and centered. All right. It's kind of big right now. So when you think about it, since it is kind of big on screen and it's over 2 lines, how could I fix that? Well, I could make this wider. I could cut this down so it wasn't the standard size, or I could just maybe make the whole thing shorter, period. All right. But for example, if I come through here with my H1 and I say font size, I don't know. Let's just make it 10 pixels. All right. Well, that made everything 10 pixels, which made it a lot smaller, but it did fix that. It's interesting that it would make the whole thing from just changing that. I wonder if I've got an error in here someplace, but I'll get rid of that font size. Which should fix everything here. And it does. All right. And also my labels, I had them float to the left. I gave them a width, a text alignment, some bottom padding. Here we said if it was a number or a text field, give it a left and bottom margin and a certain width. Have our buttons be a certain width. And have the background color for the miles per gallon be this. So if we didn't like that, if we wanted it to be white or something else, we could change that. All right. So let's look at the JavaScript. Again, we did version 1, we did version 2, we did version 3. We just finished version 4. And again, with version 4, remember what we had in there. All right, that's where we added our errors. And now we're into version 5. Version 5. So it says, this program will be turned into first an HTML form complete with number fields, required fields, etc. All right, let me add some code here. We will still use JavaScript for error checking. So let's look at that JavaScript that we're using. It should look very familiar to you by now. We've got our old friends, our constants here. Wow, this looks a little different. Ooh, this looks a lot different. In fact, the whole program looks a lot different. All right. Well, what are we doing here? Okay, let's just take it from the top. Maybe that's not the best place to take it from, but that's where I'm going to start. All right. What we're doing here is we are taking our calculate MPG and we're making it an anonymous function. How do I know that? The function itself does not have a name. All right. We're saying it's a function that requires 2 parameters. and we're going to divide one parameter by the other, and then take the answer and set it to 2 decimal places. Then we're taking the entire function, so this whole thing, this right here, is being assigned to that variable. In JavaScript, one of the neat things about JavaScript is that you are able to treat a function like a variable. And that's what we're doing right here. We've got another variable to which we're assigning a function. And notice we're using some DOM stuff, some document object model stuff. Notice we've got get element by ID, miles, gallons, MPG, and miles. Where did we get those from? We got those from miles, gallons, MPG, so ID of MPG, ID of gallons, and an ID of miles. Those are our IDs, and what we're telling it is, okay, when we try to reset the form, take what's in all 3 of these fields and blank out its value. Then take the cursor and place it on our first field. Does that work? Let's try it. We run this. All right, we put in here 50. Gallons used 2. Calculate. Now click reset. Notice where our cursor is. We'll put the cursor here. All right. We reset. All of our fields have been blanked out, and there's our cursor back there. That code that ran when we clicked the reset button is the code that's right here. The code that should run when we try to calculate is right there. Let's try to run that with nothing in there. Nothing, calculate. Notice illegal input for miles, look familiar. We're resetting it to 200. For gallons, we're resetting it to 10, and boom. Now I want to show you something just so you see it. It says, okay, we're resetting it, okay, and I guess it doesn't let me move this. This is a modal box, so I can't move it. All right. So we're even doing some error handling in here, so if you put in something that's illegal, we won't take it. So here's our calculate MPG. Here's our reset, here's our reset form. Okay. Now we've got a thing in here that says process entries. Well, what the heck is that? Well, what's that doing? That's actually doing all of the work in our function that we have talked about and we've been doing previously. We're setting miles equal to, so we're telling the system to go in, and again, that's using DOM code, document object model code. That's saying grab the value that we put into that text box, attempt to convert it. I changed it from an int to a float in case you wanted to put in there some kind of a whole number value. All right, and then do the same thing with what's in the gallons. And then we're doing our same check we did earlier. If we put in there, whatever we put in there is not a number, or it's less than 1, or it's greater than 1,000. Still have those same things. If that's the case, we give them a message saying illegal, that we're setting it to 200, and we do it. Now, that's setting the variable. This line is actually going in, and notice previously we don't have an equals, the get element by ID is on the right-hand side of an equal sign. So we're getting the value and assigning it to a variable. Now our get element by ID is on the left-hand side of an equal sign, which means we are setting the variable. So that is saying if we put in an illegal value for miles, reset it, and then make sure that that resetted value goes into the text box. And then we do the same exact thing for gallons. All right, all of that work, again, is being done inside of process entries, which is an anonymous function that we're assigning to that variable. All right, so what's left? Unload. Well, what the heck is that? This says when our program loads, we want to call another anonymous function. This, for lack of better words, these two lines that you see right here in gray, those two lines that you see in gray, every once in a while I'll have this epiphany where I think that, oh my gosh, I didn't turn on the recorder, but I did. All right, those two lines, they're not calling the function, but they're associating this button with that function and this button with that function. If we put parens after this, then what it would do would be to call that function right away. We don't want to call it right away. We want to do an association. So good, bad, or indifferent, I just made the decision. I'm going to go back and I'm going to add some comments here. Anonymous function which calculates MPG as miles driven, which we are calling M now, divided by gallons used, which again we are now calling G. Now that may or may not help, but I sometimes find that by putting in comments like this, it makes it much easier for me when I go back and look at the program, or for anyone else who may end up maintaining my program. This is another anonymous function, and what this one does is it blanks out the miles, gallons, and MPG fields, and also sets the cursor, also known as sets the focus, to the miles field. All right, that should make it very obvious to someone who is looking at the program here exactly what it is we're trying to do. This does the actual MPG processing. All right, you say, well, that does it. Well, that ends up being called from this. Okay, so what are we doing here? Get value from miles text box, assign value to miles variable. This gets the value from the gallons text box and assigns the value to the gallons variable. All right, here we are validating the miles input to make sure it is 1, numeric, and 2, in, but we'll just not in, but we'll put valid range. Greater than or equal to 1 and less than or equal to 1,000. Again, those are the names of our variables. We've got a min miles and a max miles. All right, I don't think I need to put that there. So next we want to do the same thing, but now we want to validate our gallons input to make sure it is numeric and valid, between 1 and, in this case, 50. All right? And finally, we want to reset text box value to default. And we'll say this is the miles text box value to default. And here, I want to reset the gallons text box default to the default value. And here, I want to actually call the calculate MPG function. All right. Probably could have made that a PG right there. Oops. Probably could have made that a capital PG there, as long as I make it down here, in my call, also a capital PG. All right, that should be fine. And here is the onload routine. So this, remember, fires when the program begins. And as mentioned, this associates the calculate button with the process entries function. And this associates the reset form. I'm sorry. The reset button with the reset form function. All right. And finally, this sets the initial focus to the miles text box. Now, you could make a case here and say, my gosh, you commented the wazoo out of this. Yeah, especially when you're trying to learn something. So remember, this starts on really about line 80. So we're talking a whole thing about 85 lines. I've told this story before to my other classes that years ago I went to work for a company that makes governors for airplanes. And I was hired in as an electronic data interchange programmer analyst. All right. Well, I was there for a week, and I told my wife I'd made a mistake. I didn't want to be there anymore, but they just paid $5,000 to move me from Wisconsin to Illinois. And my wife was like, you've got to give them at least a year. Okay? Well, long story short, I was there about a month, and they said, okay, now we want you to build this order entry system for us. And I asked them what language should I use, and they said, we support probably a dozen languages. Which ones do you know? And all the ones that I knew or used, a lot at the time, they supported all of them. Okay, so what does this have to do with anything? Well, I decided to write it in a derivative of Unix. And I wrote the program, and it worked just fine. The entire program was somewhere in the vicinity of 10,000 lines long. But out of those 10,000 lines, close to half of those lines were comments. I put entire program runs in there so people could see how the program should work. And I did that so that the person who I knew was going to end up taking over for me, all right, they wouldn't have any questions. And good morning. And it worked very well because the gentleman who took over for me, Mark Wilson, I asked him after he looked at the program, I said, does it make sense? And he said, how could it not? He said, I've never seen anything so well commented and documented that any question I have was answered in your comments. Well, when you put in comments like this, probably the code will run a little bit slower. But anybody who looks at it should be able to figure out what you're trying to do. I've been putting this humongous comment in here. All right, and I will continue to do that. I also want you to know I'm using this use strict, and I know what it is, but I bet you I couldn't explain it very well. What is the JavaScript used for? Strict mode is a new feature of ECMA Script 5, which is version 5 of JavaScript, that allows you to place a program or function in a strict operating context. It prevents certain actions from being taken and throws more exceptions. In other words, it's making your program, for lack of better words, a little bit more stringent. Maybe stringent isn't even the right word. It's making the program much more conservative as far as what it allows. All right. So again, I came in here, got my comments here, added my comment here to let you explain what was going on. Again, an anonymous function which calculates miles per gallon. Another anonymous function which basically just resets the form by blanking out all the fields and setting the focus to our first field. Doing our actual calculation, so another anonymous function. That actually does the MPG processing. All right. Get the value from the miles text box and assign it to miles. Get the value from the gallons text box and assign it to gallons. Validate your miles. If it's not within range, give an alert and reset it. Take that resetted value and also set it to the text box. Do the same thing with gallons. Make sure that it's within numeric and within range. If it's not, give an alert, reset the variable to the default, reset the text box to that default value, then call the actual function to do the work. All right. Then finally, our window load function, which fires when the program begins or is loaded into memory. This first thing, again, associates the calculate button with the process entries function. Then we associate the reset button with the reset form function. And finally, we set, when we initially run the program, the focus to the miles text box. So let's see if I broke anything. Hopefully I have not. So let's run it. 420. Calculate. That looks good. Reset. That looks good. Put in something out of range. We get our error message, and it's reset. Okay, so as far as I can tell now, everything that's in here is now working. All right, when I come back again in the next iteration of this program, I will be setting it up so that there's more JavaScript, because in this program we had more HTML5. So I'll be back with that in just a minute.